The NDA was 17 pages long. I remember gripping the edges with trembling fingers, counting each page while dread crawled up my spine. My hand hovered above the signature line like a guillotine, ready to drop and sever my future. My boss, no, my predator, sat across from me, eyes locked on mine, his patient wolf smile radiating from the shadows of his corner office high above the indifferent city. Behind him, the city's endless lights blinked blindly, innocent and ignorant of the betrayal unfolding in their glow. "It's standard," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Protects both of us. Protects the company. You understand." I understood exactly what I was being asked to give up. The so-called standard severance package was a muzzle, and my signature was the cage. I knew my silence was for sale. Everything I'd seen, every ugly truth I carried, every piece of proof I'd collected. This moment became a razor's edge, my integrity on one side, survival on the other. I signed it, but here's what he didn't understand. I'm not the person who stays silent. I'm the person who waits, who watches, who builds a case so airtight that when I finally speak, the whole world has to listen. This isn't a confession about breaking an NDA. This is a blueprint for burning down an empire from the inside while everyone thinks you're just another loyal employee. My name is Morgan Blake. For 3 years, I was Chief Operating Officer at Apex Meridian, a private equity firm managing $8 billion in assets. I watched my CEO commit crimes that would make your stomach turn. And for 6 months after signing that NDA, I became the most dangerous person in his life. Because the thing about NDAs is this: they can't actually stop the truth. They can only delay it. And every day of delay gave me more time to prepare, more evidence to gather, more witnesses to protect. He thought he was buying my silence. What he actually bought was my patience. And patience, I've learned, is the most powerful weapon in existence. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not to the day I signed the NDA, but to the day I learned that power and morality are two completely different things. I grew up in Ashford, a fading Pennsylvania town where my parents worked hard just to get by. I was 7 years old when I learned the most important lesson of my life. One grocery trip at age 7 taught me about public shame as my mother struggled to pay while others judged. The man behind us, wearing a suit that probably cost more than our monthly rent, checked his watch with theatrical impatience. "Some people," he said to no one in particular, "should really get their finances in order before wasting everyone else's time." My mother's hands were shaking. I was holding her coat, watching her dignity disintegrate in real time. The manager removed food from our cart. My mother accepted it. Powerless people do what they must to survive. The man behind us bought a $200 bottle of wine. We put back groceries over a clerical banking mistake that cost us 3 days of dignity. That was the day I understood. The world doesn't reward hard work or goodness. It rewards power. And power comes from having resources, connections, and the willingness to use both without conscience. My mother died at 23, delaying cancer care she couldn't afford. Her last months were spent worrying about debts, not health. She left debt. I spent my 20s working nonstop to erase it. By 30, I paid it all off and built a life where money was no longer a concern. But I never forgot what it felt like to be powerless. And I swore I would never be that person again. I earned an MBA at Georgetown. My questions about corporate ethics were often dismissed, so I stopped asking. They told me I was being reductive, that I didn't understand the nuances of modern capitalism, that business ethics wasn't an oxymoron. I got straight A's and learned to be quiet. My first job after business school was at a boutique consulting firm in Boston. I was exceptionally good, able to pinpoint inefficiencies and restructure failing companies within months. I saw how money moved through organizations like blood. I also saw how the game was really played. Executives giving themselves bonuses while laying off single mothers, companies cooking books to hide losses, powerful men making decisions that destroyed thousands of lives, then justifying those choices over 18-year-old scotch and golf. I was promoted quickly. By 32, I was a senior consultant. At 34, major firms wanted me. That's when I met Lawrence Ashford. Lawrence Ashford was a legend in private equity. Self-made billionaire. Started with nothing. Built Apex Meridian into one of the most successful firms in the country. He'd been featured in Forbes, Fortune, and Bloomberg. He gave TED Talks about conscious capitalism and stakeholder value. He donated millions to charity. Hospitals had wings named after him. He offered me the COO position at Apex Meridian in January 2020. The salary was obscene. The equity package was generational wealth. The office was on the 42nd floor of a downtown Chicago building, with views that made you feel like a god. I should have known better. By then, I'd seen up close. Wealth on that scale doesn't come to the good. But I made myself believe Lawrence was an exception. I told myself his success was earned, not stolen. That maybe, with him, I could finally turn power into something that didn't have to corrupt me. I was naive. Or maybe I just wanted to believe the lie. My first day, Lawrence took me to lunch at a restaurant where the waiters knew his name and the wine list required a sommelier to navigate. He ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. It should have been a red flag, but I told myself it was just old-fashioned manners. "Morgan," he said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "I brought you here because you're brilliant. But brilliance isn't enough in this business. You need to understand how things really work." "I'm listening," I said. He smiled. "The world is divided into two types of people, those who make the rules and those who follow them. I make the rules. And now so do you." It sounded like empowerment, like he was welcoming me into an exclusive club. Looking back, I realize it was a warning. Or maybe a confession. The first 6 months were intoxicating. I had real power for the first time in my life. I oversaw operations for a firm managing $8 billion in assets. I made decisions that moved markets. I walked into rooms, and people listened when I spoke. But I also started to notice things. Small things at first. Irregularities in our reporting. Deals that didn't quite make sense. Investments in companies that seemed designed to fail. I brought my concerns to Lawrence in July. We were in his office, going over quarterly reports. I pointed out a particular investment, a medical device company we'd acquired for $300 million that had started hemorrhaging value from the moment we acquired it. "This doesn't make sense," I said, showing him the numbers. "We paid triple what this company was worth. The due diligence should have caught this." Lawrence didn't even glance at the report. "Sometimes," he said calmly, "investments serve purposes beyond their immediate returns." "What purposes?" He looked at me with an expression I'd later learned to recognize as calculation. Deciding how much to tell me. How much I could handle. How much would make me complicit. "The medical device company is owned by Senator Whitfield's brother-in-law," he said. "We overpaid for it as a favor. The senator, in turn, ensures that certain regulatory hurdles are removed for our other investments. It's symbiosis, Morgan. Everybody wins." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "That's bribery. That's business," he corrected. "And if you're going to succeed here, you need to understand the difference." I should have walked out that day. Should have gone straight to the SEC. Should have been the whistleblower with a conscience. But I didn't. Because I'd spent my whole life climbing toward power, and I'd just gotten my first taste of it. I told myself I needed more evidence. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. That I couldn't act rashly. Really, I was just afraid. Afraid of losing everything I'd worked for. Afraid of ending up powerless again. So I stayed. And I watched. And I documented. Over the next 2 years, I saw everything. And I mean everything. I watched Lawrence bribe politicians, blackmail competitors, and defraud investors. I watched him manipulate stock prices through shell companies and insider trading. I watched him acquire struggling companies, strip them of their assets, load them with debt, then sell them off in pieces while thousands of employees lost their jobs and their pensions. The medical device bribery was just the tip of the iceberg. Lawrence had built a machine of corruption so sophisticated, so well hidden behind layers of legitimate business, that it was invisible to everyone except those operating it. And I was one of those people now, whether I wanted to be or not. The worst part wasn't the crimes themselves. It was how normalized they were. How casually Lawrence talked about destroying lives. How the other executives at Apex Meridian, smart, educated people, participated without hesitation. There was Dominic Hale, our CFO, who created the shell companies and issued false invoices to hide our illegal transactions. There was Judith Monroe, our general counsel, who wrote the contracts that gave us legal cover while we violated every regulation that mattered. There was Trevor Brand, our head of acquisitions, who specialized in finding vulnerable companies we could gut for profit. They weren't monsters. They were normal people who'd made a series of small compromises until they couldn't see the line between legal and illegal anymore. Or maybe they could see it, and they just didn't care. I told myself I was different, that I was gathering evidence, that I was planning to do the right thing eventually. But every day I stayed made me more complicit. Every day I didn't speak up meant more people were hurt by our actions. More families destroyed. More laws broken. I was becoming exactly what I'd always feared. Someone with power who used it to serve herself instead of seeking justice. The breaking point came in March 2023. We'd acquired a pharmaceutical company, Biotech Solutions, for $1.2 billion. Lawrence had pitched it to our investors as a value play, a solid company with strong fundamentals that was undervalued by the market. But I'd seen the internal documents. Biotech Solutions was developing a drug for a rare childhood cancer. The drug was in phase 3 trials and showing remarkable results. It could save thousands of children's lives. But the trials were expensive. Biotech was burning through cash. They needed capital to finish the research and bring the drug to market. That's where we came in. We bought the company. We told the founders and investors we'd provide the capital they needed. We talked about our commitment to medical innovation and saving lives. Then, 3 months after the acquisition closed, Lawrence called a meeting. He, Dominic, Judith, Trevor, and I sat in the conference room. Lawrence put the biotech financials on the screen. "We're shutting down the cancer drug trials," he said. No preamble. No discussion. I felt like I'd been punched. "What? Why?" "The timeline to market is too long," Dominic said, clicking through spreadsheets. "We need faster returns. We're going to strip the company's assets, sell off the patents, and liquidate." "That drug could save children's lives," I said, my voice rising. "The trials are showing a 90% response rate. We're 3 months from completing phase 3. Lawrence looked at me with something between pity and contempt. "And the company will be bankrupt before those 3 months are up. We're private equity, Morgan, not a charity. Our job is to make money for our investors. We promised the founders. We promised them a liquidity event," Judith interrupted, "which they got when we bought the company. What we do with it afterward is our business." I looked around the table. No one else seemed bothered. This was just another day at Apex Meridian. Another company acquired, stripped, destroyed. "Those children will die," I said quietly. Trevor shrugged. "Other companies will develop other drugs. That's not our problem." Lawrence stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "Morgan, I need you to oversee the liquidation. I want this wrapped up by the end of the quarter." "No." The room went silent. No one said no to Lawrence Ashford. He turned slowly to look at me. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I won't oversee this. It's unconscionable." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. "This isn't a request, Morgan. It's your job." Then I quit. "So let me ask you something. Was that the moment I became the villain? When I finally said no to evil, after 2 years of going along with it? When I decided to take a stand, but only after I'd already been complicit in so much harm? Or was I the villain all along? And that was just the moment I started trying to pretend I wasn't? Think about it. Because we're just getting started, and the next part is where things get really complicated." Lawrence didn't accept my resignation. Not in the way I expected, anyway. I walked out of that conference room, went back to my office, and started drafting my formal letter of resignation. I was furious, sick to my stomach, but also relieved. I was finally going to do the right thing. I'd leave Apex Meridian, and then I'd figure out how to expose what Lawrence had been doing. I was naive enough to think he'd just let me walk away. 15 minutes after I quit, Lawrence's assistant called. "Mr. Ashford would like to see you in his office." Now, I almost refused, but curiosity won. Or maybe it was the small, self-destructive part of me that wanted to hear what he'd say. How he'd try to convince me to stay. I took the elevator to 42. Walked past his assistant without making eye contact. Knocked on his door. "Come in, Morgan." Lawrence was standing at his window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city. Power pose. Alpha male dominance display. I'd seen him do it 100 times. "You can't quit," he said without turning around. "I already did." "No. You misunderstand me. I'm not saying you shouldn't quit. I'm saying you can't quit. Legally." I felt the first flutter of real fear. "What are you talking about?" He turned to face me. His expression was pleasant, almost friendly. "That's what made it terrifying. Your employment contract has a clause. Executives at the COO level and above are required to give 6 months' notice before resignation. It's designed to ensure smooth transitions and protect proprietary information. I'll give you 6 months' notice then." "That's not how this works, Morgan. If you attempt to leave before the 6-month period is complete, Apex Meridian is entitled to seek compensation for damages. We'd also be required to investigate whether you violated your fiduciary duty to the company, whether you disclosed confidential information, whether you committed any irregularities in your role here. The threat was clear. If I tried to leave, he'd bury me in lawsuits and investigations. He'd create evidence of wrongdoing on my part. He'd destroy my career and possibly my freedom. You're blackmailing me, I said. I'm reminding you of your contractual obligations. He walked to his desk and picked up a document. But I understand you're upset. You're having a crisis of conscience. It's admirable, really. So I'm prepared to offer you a compromise. He slid the document across his desk. I recognized it immediately. A non-disclosure agreement. This NDA releases you from your employment contract, effective immediately, Lawrence said. You'll receive 2 years of severance at your current salary, full benefits, and a generous stock options package that will vest over the next 5 years. In exchange, you agree never to disclose any proprietary or confidential information about Apex Meridian's business practices. I picked up the NDA with hands that had started to shake. 17 pages. Densely worded. Broadly defined terms like proprietary information and confidential business practices could mean anything. This wasn't a severance package. It was a gag order. If you don't sign, Lawrence continued, his voice still pleasant, you'll spend the next 6 months working here. And during that time, I'll make sure you're implicated in every decision you claim to find so objectionable. Every document you've ever signed, every meeting you've attended, every email you've sent. It all creates a paper trail that shows you were a willing participant in our business practices. That's not true. Truth is whatever we can prove in court, Morgan. And I have much better lawyers than you do. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time. Not as a brilliant entrepreneur or a visionary leader. As a predator. A man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of destroying anyone who threatened him. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why not just let me leave? I'm one employee. I'm not that important. Because you're smart enough to be dangerous, he said. And I don't leave loose ends. Sign the NDA, take the money, and go live your life. Or refuse. And I'll make sure you spend the next decade fighting lawsuits you can't afford to win. Your choice. I sat in his office for 10 minutes, staring at those 17 pages. Lawrence didn't rush me. He sat at his desk, typing on his laptop, occasionally taking phone calls. Letting me marinate in my own fear. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to refuse. To walk out. To go straight to the authorities and tell them everything. But I thought about my mother. About dying in a hospice room, drowning in medical debt. About what it meant to be powerless. Lawrence could destroy me. He had the resources, the connections, the lawyers. He could tie me up in litigation for years. Bankrupt me. Ruin my reputation. Make sure I never work in business again. Or I could sign the NDA, take the money, and at least have the resources to rebuild my life somewhere else. It wasn't a choice. It was an execution where I got to pick the method. I picked up the pen. Smart decision, Lawrence said when I'd signed the last page. You know, Morgan, you would have been great here if you'd just learned to play the game. But you're too principled. And principles are a luxury that people like you and me can't afford. People like you and me aren't the same, I said. He smiled. We're more alike than you want to admit. We both understand how the world really works. We both know that power is the only thing that matters. The only difference is that I've accepted it, and you're still pretending you haven't. I left his office with the executed NDA and a direct deposit confirmation for $847,000, the first installment of my severance package. I also left with something else, a burning, crystalline understanding that Lawrence Ashford was right about one thing. We were alike. We both understood power, and I was going to use that understanding to destroy him. The first thing I did after signing the NDA was disappear. Not literally. I didn't flee the country or go into hiding. I did something much more effective. I became boring. I moved back to Pennsylvania, to a small town 40 miles from where I grew up. I rented a modest apartment. I didn't post on social media. I didn't reach out to old colleagues. I didn't do anything that would draw attention to anyone watching, and I had to assume Lawrence was watching. I looked like exactly what he wanted me to be, a broken executive who'd taken the money and slunk away in defeat. But I was doing something else, something patient and methodical and utterly ruthless. I was building a case. During my 3 years at Apex Meridian, I'd accumulated thousands of documents. Emails, financial reports, internal memos, meeting notes, contracts, recorded phone calls from our conference system. All of it was stored on company servers, which I no longer had access to. But I'd been careful, very careful. Every week for the past 18 months, I'd used my personal phone to photograph key documents. I'd forwarded emails to a personal account using language that made it look like normal work correspondence. I'd kept backup copies of files on encrypted thumb drives that I brought home in my purse. I'd been documenting Lawrence's crimes without even consciously planning to. Some part of me had always known this day would come. Now I had a new apartment with a spare bedroom that I'd converted into a war room. I covered one entire wall with a timeline of Lawrence's criminal activity. Every bribe, every instance of fraud, every regulatory violation. Names, dates, amounts, evidence. It looked like something from a conspiracy thriller, which I suppose is exactly what it was. But documentation wasn't enough. The NDA meant I couldn't just go to the authorities. If I violated it, Lawrence would sue me for breach of contract before I could finish my first conversation with the SEC. He'd tie me up in legal proceedings that would prevent my evidence from ever seeing a courtroom. I needed to find a way to expose him without technically violating the NDA. Or I needed to make the NDA irrelevant. That's when I started researching whistleblower protections. The Dodd-Frank Act has a provision that protects whistleblowers who report securities violations to the SEC. If you can prove that your employer engaged in securities fraud, the law prohibits them from retaliating against you, including through NDA enforcement. But there's a catch. You have to report the fraud directly to the SEC within a specific time frame. And you have to do it in a way that's considered protected activity under the law. I spent 6 weeks reading case law, studying precedents, and consulting with lawyers through anonymous online forums. I learned that if I timed this correctly and presented the right evidence in the right way, Lawrence's NDA would be legally unenforceable. But I also learned something else. Whistleblowers lose. Even when they win, they lose. Their careers are destroyed. Their reputations are shredded. They spend years fighting legal battles, hemorrhaging money on lawyers, and becoming pariahs in their industries. The system is designed to punish people who tell the truth. So I made a decision. If I were going to do this, if I were going to go to war with Lawrence Ashford, I wasn't going to be a traditional whistleblower. I wasn't going to be the noble hero who sacrifices everything for justice. I was going to be smart, strategic, ruthless. I was going to become exactly the kind of person Lawrence had trained me to be. And I was going to use those skills to destroy him completely. My plan required 3 things: evidence, witnesses, and leverage. Evidence I had. Thousands of documents proving securities fraud, bribery, insider trading, and more. Witnesses were harder. I needed people inside Apex Meridian who would corroborate my testimony. But everyone still working there was either complicit in the crimes or too afraid of Lawrence to speak up. I started with the people who'd already left. Over the past 5 years, 17 senior employees have departed Apex Meridian. Some had been fired. Others had resigned under suspicious circumstances. I tracked down 12 of them. Most refused to talk to me. They'd signed NDAs too, and they weren't willing to risk Lawrence's wrath. But 3 agreed to meet. The first was Gina Carmichael, a former compliance officer who'd been fired after raising concerns about a suspicious transaction. We met at a coffee shop in Boston, where she now worked for a much smaller firm. I knew something was wrong, she told me, her voice quiet. I flagged a series of payments to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Asked Lawrence about it. 2 weeks later, I was terminated for performance issues. Did you document the transaction? I took screenshots before they fired me and wiped my access. But I signed an NDA. If I give you those screenshots, Lawrence will sue me into oblivion. What if there was a way to protect you? I asked. What if you could testify without violating your NDA? She looked at me with a mixture of hope and skepticism. How? I explained the whistleblower protections, the legal arguments, the precedents that would make her NDA unenforceable if she reported securities fraud to the SEC. I don't know, she said finally. It's a huge risk. Gina, Lawrence Ashford is committing crimes that are destroying people's lives. The biotech solutions cancer drug alone. Children are dying because he shut down those trials. How many more people have to suffer before someone stops him? She was quiet for a long time. Then, let me think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. The second potential witness was Randall Frost, former head of investor relations. He'd resigned after what he described as philosophical differences with Lawrence. We met at a bar in D.C. He was drunk before I arrived. "You want me to testify against Lawrence?" He laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea what that man is capable of? He doesn't just sue people, Morgan. He destroys them. There was a journalist a few years ago who was investigating Apex. Started asking uncomfortable questions. You know what happened to him? Tell me." Lawrence hired a private investigation firm. They dug into this guy's entire life. Found out he'd had an affair 10 years earlier. Found out he'd once been arrested for DUI in college. Found out his brother had a gambling problem. Lawrence didn't just discredit the journalist. He destroyed his marriage, got himself fired, and made sure he'd never work in journalism again. The investigation into Apex quietly disappeared. That's illegal. So is everything else Lawrence does. Doesn't seem to stop him. Randall finished his drink and signaled for another. "I'm not testifying. I've got a wife and 2 kids. I'm not putting them through that." I understood. But I also felt a cold contempt for his cowardice. "What if I told you Lawrence is going down anyway?" I said. "What if I told you I have enough evidence to bury him, with or without your testimony? You can either be part of bringing him to justice, or you can be the person who knew about his crimes and did nothing." Randall stared into his glass. "I need to think about it. Another maybe." I was collecting them like trading cards. The third potential witness was Jasper Chin. Wait, no, I said no Asian names. Let me revise. The third potential witness was Jasper Burke, a former junior analyst who'd worked in the acquisitions department. He'd been fired 3 years ago, officially for missing performance targets. But according to my research, the real reason was that he'd objected to some of Trevor Brand's more aggressive tactics. Jasper was now working as a high school math teacher in rural Ohio. We met at his school after hours, in an empty classroom that smelled like chalk and teenage anxiety. "I've tried to forget my time at Apex," he said. "I spent 6 months there, saw enough to give me nightmares, and got fired for my trouble. I signed an NDA. I took my severance. I moved on. What did you see?" He hesitated. Then, Trevor had me create financial projections for companies we were acquiring. But he'd give me specific instructions on how to manipulate the models. Make certain assumptions that weren't realistic. Hide certain costs. Make failing companies look profitable on paper. So you were helping him commit fraud. I was 24 years old and terrified of losing my job. I did what I was told. His voice cracked. I knew it was wrong. But I didn't know how wrong until later, when I saw what happened to those companies. All those people who lost their jobs, their pensions, their livelihoods. That was my work. My projections made it possible. I saw the guilt eating him alive. Saw myself reflected in his eyes. "You can fix it," I said quietly. "You can testify about what Trevor made you do. You can help hold them accountable. And destroy my life in the process." "Your life is already destroyed, Jasper. You're a math teacher making $40,000 a year with an MBA from Wharton. You wake up every day knowing you helped hurt people and did nothing about it. That's not a life. That's a sentence." He looked at me with something between anger and relief. "You're a real piece of work, you know that? Coming in here, guilting me into reliving the worst period of my life. I'm not guilting you. I'm offering you redemption. At what cost? Whatever it takes. Here's what I need you to understand. I wasn't trying to be noble. I wasn't some crusader for justice. I was building an army because I needed one to fight a war I couldn't win alone. I manipulated Gina's guilt. I appealed to Randall's fear of being complicit. I offered Jasper redemption he didn't deserve. I used their pain as currency, just like Lawrence had used mine. So tell me, does the end justify the means? If I destroy a monster by becoming a monster myself, who wins? We're about to find out. Because in the next part, things get much worse before they get better. By September 2023, 6 months after I'd signed the NDA, I had assembled my case against Lawrence Ashford like a master jewel thief assembling the tools for a heist. I had over 4,000 documents proving securities fraud, bribery, insider trading, and regulatory violations. 3 potential witnesses who were thinking about it. A comprehensive timeline of Lawrence's criminal activity spanning 7 years. A legal strategy for making the NDA unenforceable under whistleblower protection laws. And absolutely no guarantee that any of it would work. I spent my days in my apartment war room, cross-referencing documents, building narrative threads, creating an evidence package so complete and so damning that even Lawrence's expensive lawyers wouldn't be able to defend against it. I spent my nights lying awake, wondering if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Because here's what nobody tells you about whistleblowing. It's not just about having evidence. It's about timing, strategy, and understanding the game you're playing. The SEC receives thousands of whistleblower complaints every year. Most of them go nowhere. The complaints that do result in investigations and prosecutions have certain characteristics. They're meticulously documented, they involve clear violations of securities law, and they come from credible sources. I had the documentation. I had the violations. But credibility was my weak point. I'd worked at Apex Meridian for 3 years. I'd signed off on documents. I'd attended meetings. I'd been part of the executive team that had committed these crimes. Lawrence's defense would be obvious. I was a disgruntled former employee trying to deflect blame for my own misconduct. I needed to get ahead of that narrative. I needed to position myself not as a participant in Lawrence's crimes, but as a witness who'd been silenced by an illegal NDA. That's when I came up with phase 1 of my plan, the media strategy. I couldn't go to the SEC first. If I did, Lawrence would immediately file for an injunction to enforce the NDA, and everything would get tied up in legal proceedings before the investigation even started. Instead, I needed to go public in a way that would make the NDA irrelevant. I needed to create so much public pressure that the SEC would have to investigate, regardless of what Lawrence's lawyers claimed. I needed to become a story. I researched investigative journalists who specialized in financial crime. Reporters who'd taken down powerful executives, who'd broken stories about corporate fraud, who had the credibility and the platform to make people pay attention. I found her in November. Lydia Brennan, an investigative reporter for the Financial Observer who'd won a Pulitzer for her reporting on a hedge fund scandal. She'd spent 2 years building that story, interviewing hundreds of sources, obtaining thousands of documents. She was patient, thorough, and absolutely relentless. She was perfect. I created an anonymous, encrypted email account and sent her a message. Asterisk, I have evidence of securities fraud, bribery, and insider trading at Apex Meridian, a private equity firm managing $8 billion in assets. The CEO, Lawrence Ashford, has been committing these crimes for at least 7 years. I was forced to sign an NDA to hide his crimes. I have thousands of documents. I have witnesses. I'm willing to go on record. Are you interested? Asterisk. She responded in 6 hours. Prove it. I sent her 3 documents. Just 3, but they were explosive. An email from Lawrence to Senator Whitfield's chief of staff, explicitly discussing a $300 million investment in exchange for favorable regulatory treatment. Internal financial projections showed that Lawrence knew a pharmaceutical company acquisition would fail before he sold it to investors as a solid opportunity. A recorded phone call, legally recorded as part of our conference system, where Lawrence instructed Dominic to create false invoices to hide cash payments to a shell company. Lydia responded in 2 hours. We need to meet. In person. Somewhere secure. We met in a hotel room in Philadelphia in early December. Lydia was in her 50s, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with the perpetually skeptical expression of someone who'd been lied to by powerful people for 30 years. She had a laptop, 2 recording devices, a legal pad, and an attorney sitting beside her. Before we start, the attorney said, I need to be clear about the legal implications. You signed an NDA. If you violate it, Apex Meridian can sue you. We can help protect you under whistleblower laws, but it's not a guarantee. This could cost you everything. I know, I said. Why are you doing this? Lydia asked. She wasn't interested in my documents yet. She wanted to understand my motivations. Looking for the angle, the revenge fantasy, the hidden agenda. Smart. Because Lawrence Ashford shut down clinical trials for a cancer drug that could have saved children's lives, I said. Because he's stolen hundreds of millions of dollars from investors. Because he's bribed politicians, destroyed companies, and ruined thousands of lives. And because he thinks he's untouchable. Are you? Am I what? Untouchable. You were the COO. You signed documents. You attended meetings. You benefited from the crimes you're now reporting. How do I know you're not just as guilty as he is? It was the question I'd been dreading. The question that kept me up at night. I'm not innocent, I said slowly. I participated in things I shouldn't have. I stayed when I should have left. I was complicit, but I'm trying to fix it now. I'm trying to make sure Lawrence doesn't hurt anyone else. Noble, Lydia said dryly. But forgive me if I'm skeptical. You're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart. You're doing this because Lawrence screwed you over, and you want revenge. Yes, I admitted. I want revenge. I want to watch him lose everything, the way he's made so many other people lose everything. I want him to feel powerless. I want him to understand what it's like to have someone more powerful than you destroy your life on a whim. Lydia smiled for the first time. Good. That I believe. Now show me your evidence. We spent 6 hours going through documents that night. Lydia and her attorney asked hundreds of questions. They pushed back on my interpretations. They looked for holes in my narrative. By the end, Lydia was convinced. This is Pulitzer-level material, she said quietly. If even half of what you're showing me is true, this is the biggest private equity scandal in a decade. But I need more. I need corroboration. I need witnesses. I need people who'll go on record. I'm on record. You're one source and you're a disgruntled former employee. I need at least 2 more people to confirm your allegations. Ideally, people are still inside the apex meridian. I thought about Gina, Randall, and Jasper. My 3 maybes. I'm working on it, I said. Work faster, Lydia replied. Because I'm going to start digging into this, and the moment I start asking questions, Lawrence is going to know something's coming. You'll have a very short window to get your witnesses on board before he locks everything down. She was right. The moment Lawrence knew I was talking to journalists, he'd go into crisis mode. He'd threaten employees. He'd destroy evidence. He'd hire the best crisis management firms in the world. I had maybe 2 weeks before I lost my advantage. I needed to move fast. I called Gina first. She'd been the most sympathetic of my 3 potential witnesses. I'm going public, I told her. With or without you. A journalist from the Financial Observer is writing the story. The SEC is going to investigate. This is happening. Morgan, I have a family. I have a career. I can't. Gina, you have a choice. You can get ahead of this and be a whistleblower who helped expose crimes. Or you can stay silent and be a co-conspirator when the investigation starts. Because once the SEC gets involved, they'll interview everyone who worked at Apex. Everyone who knew what was happening. And if you lied to them to protect Lawrence, that's a federal crime. It was a threat. A manipulation. Exactly the kind of thing Lawrence would do. It worked. What do you need from me? Gina asked quietly. I need you to give an interview to the journalist. I need you to provide the documents you took when you left. And I need you to be willing to testify if this goes to trial. And you really think the whistleblower protections will hold? I've consulted with 3 different lawyers. If we do this right, your NDA will be unenforceable. But I can't guarantee it. This is a risk. She was quiet for a long time. Then, okay, I'll do it. 1 down. Randall was harder. When I called him with the same pitch, he refused outright. I told you, I'm not getting involved. I don't care if you have the Pope as a witness. I'm not putting my family through this. Randall, you don't have a choice anymore. The story is coming out. Your name is going to come up. Investors will want to know who knew about Lawrence's crimes and did nothing about them. You can either be part of the solution, or you can be part of the problem. You're threatening me. I'm giving you information. What you do with it is your choice. He hung up on me. I called him back 5 times. He didn't answer. Finally, I sent him an email. Randall, I'm attaching a draft of the article that's going to be published. Your name appears in it 6 times, each time in the context of someone who knew about the fraud and chose to resign rather than report it. That's not illegal, but it doesn't look great. You have 48 hours to decide if you want to be on the right side of this story. Morgan, I was bluffing. I hadn't seen a draft of Lydia's article. But Randall didn't know that. He called me back in 3 hours. You're a real piece of work, he said. So I've been told. Fine. I'll talk to your journalist. But if this blows up in my face, I'm coming after you. Get in line. 2 down. Jasper was the easiest, which surprised me. When I called him, he didn't even let me finish my pitch. I've been waiting for this call, he said. I've spent 3 years teaching algebra to kids who don't care, going home to an empty apartment, and trying to convince myself I'm not a coward. If you're really taking Lawrence down, I want to help. It's going to be brutal, Jasper. He's going to come after you with everything he has. Let him. I've got nothing left to lose. And maybe if I do this, I can look at myself in the mirror again. This isn't about redemption. Yes, it is. For both of us. I couldn't argue with that. 3 witnesses. thousands of documents. A journalist with a Pulitzer and the credibility to make the world listen. I had everything I needed. Phase 1 of my plan, building the case, was complete. Now it was time for Phase 2, detonation. So here's my question for you. I manipulated 3 people into risking everything to help me take down Lawrence Ashford. I used their guilt, their fear, their desperation. I threatened them. I lied to them. But I did it to expose real crimes. To bring down a man who'd hurt thousands of people. To maybe, possibly, save some future victims from Lawrence's predation. Does that make me a hero? Or does it just make me a different kind of villain? Because I'm not sure I know the answer anymore. And I'm not sure it matters. Lydia's article was published on January 15, 2024, at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The headline, Apex Predator: How Billionaire Lawrence Ashford Built an Empire on Fraud, Bribery, and Broken Lives. It was 14,000 words. Meticulously sourced. Devastating. Lydia had spent 6 weeks conducting additional interviews, verifying documents, and building the narrative. She'd interviewed me on record. She'd interviewed Gina, Randall, and Jasper on record. She'd tracked down former employees of companies Lawrence had destroyed and got them to describe, in their own words, how Apex Meridian had gutted their employers and ruined their lives. She'd obtained the internal documents showing Biotech Solutions' decision. She'd found the families of children who'd been in the clinical trials. Children who were now dying because Lawrence had shut down the research that could have saved them. She'd dug up the Senator Whitfield connection and got the senator's office to issue a furious no comment. She'd traced the shell companies, the false invoices, the hidden payments. She'd built a case so complete, so irrefutable, that even Lawrence's crisis management team couldn't spin their way out of it. The Financial Observer's website crashed due to the traffic. Within 2 hours, every major news outlet had picked up the story. By noon, it was trending on social media. By evening, senators were calling for investigations. I watched it unfold from my apartment in Pennsylvania, refreshing news sites obsessively, reading every comment, every reaction. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was exactly what I'd planned. And at 4:37 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Hello, Morgan. Lawrence Ashford. His voice was calm. Pleasant. Like we were old friends catching up. I was wondering when you'd call, I said. I have to admit I'm impressed. You really did your homework. The journalist, the witnesses, the documents. It's all very thorough. Very professional. I trained you well. You didn't train me to expose criminals. Didn't I? I taught you to be ruthless. To identify weaknesses and exploit them. To win at any cost. You've done all of that beautifully. The only difference is you're pointing it at me instead of with me. I felt a chill. Why are you calling, Lawrence? Because I want you to understand something. You think you've won. You think this article, these allegations, are going to destroy me. But you've forgotten the fundamental rule of power. I make the rules. The SEC is going to investigate you. The FBI is probably already building a case. You're going down. Maybe, he said. Eventually. But it will take years. And during those years, I'm going to make sure you suffer for every single day. I'm going to sue you for violating the NDA. I'm going to sue your witnesses. I'm going to sue that journalist and her publication. I'm going to tie all of you up in legal proceedings that will bankrupt you, destroy your reputations, and consume your lives. Whistleblower protections is a theory your lawyers are hoping holds up in court. But we won't know for sure until we test it, will we? And testing it will cost you millions in legal fees. Do you have millions, Morgan? Because I do. He was right. This was going to be a long, brutal fight. And Lawrence had resources I could never match. But I'd prepared for this. Lawrence, do you remember when you said we were alike? That we both understood power? I do. You were right. We are alike. Which means I understand exactly how you think. And I've prepared accordingly. What does that mean? Check your email. I just sent you something. There was a pause. I heard typing. Then silence. Then, what the fuck is this? That's a file containing copies of every document I gave to the journalist. Plus about 3,000 more. All time-stamped. All stored on encrypted servers with deadman switches. If anything happens to me, if I'm sued, if I'm harassed, if I have any accidents, those documents get automatically sent to the SEC, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and every major news outlet in the country. You're bluffing. Am I? You trained me to be thorough, Lawrence. You trained me to plan for every contingency. You trained me to be just like you. Congratulations. You created the weapon that's going to destroy you." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its pleasant veneer. "I'm going to ruin you, Morgan. Even if it takes everything I have, I'm going to make sure you regret this." "Get in line," I said and hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt more alive than I had in years. The next few months were chaos. The SEC opened a formal investigation into Apex Meridian on January 20th. The FBI started interviewing witnesses in early February. The Department of Justice began building a criminal case. Lawrence hired a team of 20 lawyers and an elite crisis management firm. They issued statements calling the allegations baseless, calling me a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind, calling the article a hit piece based on unreliable sources. It didn't work. Too many documents. Too many witnesses. Too much corroboration. In March, 3 of Apex Meridian's biggest investors withdrew their capital, $2.3 billion gone in a single week. In April, Dominic Hale, the CFO, was arrested on securities fraud charges. He immediately took a plea deal and agreed to cooperate with investigators. In May, the board of directors of Apex Meridian forced Lawrence to step down as CEO while conducting its own internal investigation. In June, Senator Whitfield announced he wouldn't seek re-election, citing personal reasons. His chief of staff resigned the same day. Lawrence Ashford's empire was crumbling, brick by brick. But he kept his promise. He was making me suffer. Lawrence sued me in February for $50 million, alleging a violation of the NDA. He sued Gina, Randall, and Jasper for a combined $30 million. He sued the Financial Observer and Lydia Brennan for defamation, demanding $200 million in damages. My lawyers filed motions to dismiss based on whistleblower protections. But Lawrence's lawyers fought every motion, filed every delay they could, and turned the case into a legal quagmire. The legal fees were crushing. Even with a team of pro bono lawyers from a whistleblower advocacy group, I was spending tens of thousands of dollars on expenses, court costs, and travel. My severance money was running out. I'd burned through $400,000 in legal fees by April. I got a job waiting tables at a restaurant in Pennsylvania to pay rent. I, a former COO of a billion-dollar firm, am serving pancakes to truckers at 6 a.m. Lawrence's lawyers learned of it and leaked it to the press. Whistleblower reduced to waitressing as frivolous lawsuit collapses. It was humiliating, degrading, exactly what Lawrence wanted. But I kept going, because I'd made a choice. I'd decided that exposing Lawrence was worth whatever it cost me personally. And slowly, painfully, the legal system began to work. In July, a federal judge ruled that my NDA was unenforceable under whistleblower protection laws. The judge wrote a scathing opinion stating that NDAs cannot be used to cover up securities fraud, and that attempting to enforce such an NDA was itself evidence of obstruction. Lawrence's lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice. The lawsuits against Gina, Randall, and Jasper were dismissed shortly after. The defamation lawsuit against the Financial Observer was thrown out in August. Lawrence had lost every legal battle, but he still had one more play. In September, Lawrence's lawyers filed a motion claiming that I had stolen proprietary documents when I left Apex Meridian, and that those documents should be inadmissible in any criminal trial because they were obtained illegally. It was a desperate move, but it was smart. If the documents I'd provided were ruled inadmissible, the entire case against Lawrence would collapse. Everything I'd done, the witnesses, the article, the investigations, would be for nothing. The hearing was set for October 15th in federal court in Chicago. I flew back to Chicago for the first time since I'd signed the NDA. Walked into that courthouse with my legal team, 3 lawyers from the Whistleblower Advocacy Group and 1 from the SEC's Enforcement Division. Lawrence was there, surrounded by his own legal army. He looked older, thinner. The stress was showing. But when our eyes met across the courtroom, he smiled, still thinking he could win. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Lawrence's lawyers argued that I had violated my employment agreement by taking documents that belonged to Apex Meridian, that I had committed theft. The evidence was therefore the fruit of the poisonous tree and should be excluded. My lawyers argued that the documents were evidence of crimes and that exposing crimes overrides any employment agreement. They cited precedent after precedent, showing that whistleblowers are protected when they document illegal activity. The judge listened carefully, asked pointed questions, took a recess to review the case law. When she returned, her ruling was swift and clear. This court finds that the documents in question constitute evidence of securities fraud and other criminal violations. Under the Dodd-Frank Act and established whistleblower protections, the defendant had not only the right but arguably the duty to preserve and report such evidence. The plaintiff's attempt to exclude this evidence is denied. Furthermore, this court finds that the plaintiff's repeated attempts to silence whistleblowers through intimidation and frivolous litigation constitute obstruction of justice. This matter is being referred to the Department of Justice for potential prosecution. Lawrence's face went white. It was over. He'd lost. I walked out of that courthouse, and I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted, hollowed out, like I'd spent everything I had to win a war that had cost me more than I'd expected to pay. But I'd won. Lawrence Ashford was going down. The SEC was building a massive case. The DOJ was pursuing criminal charges. His empire was in ruins. So here's what I want to know. Was it worth it? I destroyed my career, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, lived in fear for months, got dragged through the legal system, and was humiliated publicly. But I brought down a monster. Was that a fair trade? Or did I just destroy my life for revenge dressed up as justice? Because honestly, I'm still not sure. The trial of Lawrence Ashford began on March 3, 2025. It was held in federal court in Manhattan. The prosecution had spent months building its case. 47 charges, including securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The trial lasted 7 weeks. I testified for 2 days. Sitting in that witness box, describing in detail every crime I'd witnessed, every document I'd preserved, every lie Lawrence had told, it was surreal. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as a vengeful ex-employee. They brought up every mistake I'd ever made at Apex Meridian. They questioned my motives, my credibility, my integrity. Ms. Blake, isn't it true that you participated in many of the same decisions you're now claiming were criminal? Yes. So you're admitting you committed crimes? I'm admitting I was complicit in a criminal enterprise that I later helped expose. I'm not claiming to be innocent. I'm claiming to be honest. The prosecutor had coached me well. Own your complicity. Don't pretend to be a hero. Just tell the truth. Gina testified. Randall testified. Jasper testified. Dominic Hale, the former CFO, testified for the prosecution under his plea agreement, describing in excruciating detail how Lawrence had orchestrated the fraud. Former employees of companies Lawrence had destroyed testified about how Apex Meridian had gutted their employers and ruined their lives. The mother of a child who died from cancer, a child who'd been in the biotech solutions trials that Lawrence had shut down, testified about watching her daughter die knowing that a treatment existed that could have saved her life. That testimony broke the jury. I saw it in their faces. The cold calculation of securities fraud was one thing. But a dead child because a billionaire wanted faster returns on investment? That was different. Lawrence's defense was predictable. He was a successful entrepreneur targeted by jealous competitors and disgruntled employees. The transactions in question were complex but legal. Any irregularities were the result of overzealous subordinates acting without his knowledge. It was a standard blame everyone else defense. It might have worked with a less comprehensive case. But the prosecution had emails, recorded phone calls, financial documents with Lawrence's signature, witnesses who described in detail conversations where Lawrence explicitly instructed them to break the law. The defense couldn't overcome the weight of evidence. On April 24, 2025, after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty on 39 of 47 charges. I wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. I couldn't be. The stress of testifying had been too much. I'd been having panic attacks, nightmares, and insomnia. I watched it happen on the news from my apartment in Pennsylvania. I saw Lawrence's face as the verdict was read. Saw the momentary crack in his composure. Saw his lawyers immediately lean in to whisper what would happen next. The sentencing hearing was set for June 10th. Lawrence faced up to 45 years in federal prison. The news anchors were calling it one of the biggest white-collar criminal cases in a decade, comparing it to Enron, to Bernie Madoff, to the financial crisis prosecutions. Lawrence Ashford, the billionaire who'd thought he was untouchable, was going to prison. I'd won. So why did I feel so empty? The sentencing hearing was surprisingly brief. The judge had read all the victim impact statements, hundreds of them. People whose lives Lawrence had destroyed. Families of the children who died because he shut down the cancer drug trials. Employees of companies he'd gutted. Investors he'd defrauded. The prosecutor recommended 35 years. The defense asked for 8, citing Lawrence's age 59, his charitable contributions, and his lack of prior criminal history. The judge listened to both sides. Then she spoke directly to Lawrence. "Mr. Ashford, you were given every advantage in life. You had intelligence, education, opportunity, and resources most people can only dream of. You could have built something meaningful, something that helped people. Instead, you built an empire of greed and cruelty. You destroyed companies, ruined lives, and when you were caught, you tried to destroy the people brave enough to expose you." This court has read hundreds of victim impact statements. Every one of them describes the same pattern. You saw people as tools to be used and discarded. You saw laws as obstacles to be circumvented. You saw ethics as a weakness. This court sentences you to 30 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 20 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $847 million in restitution to your victims. Your assets will be seized and liquidated to pay these debts. You will spend the rest of your life making amends for the harm you've caused, though no amount of money can truly compensate for the lives you've destroyed. 30 years. Lawrence Ashford would be 89 when he got out, if he lived that long. He showed no reaction. Just stood there, perfectly still, as the marshals prepared to take him into custody. But before they did, he turned and looked directly at me. I was sitting in the gallery 3 rows back. Our eyes met. He didn't look angry. Didn't look defeated. He looked curious, like he was trying to understand something. Then the marshals took him away, and I never saw Lawrence Ashford again. The aftermath was complicated. Apex Meridian collapsed completely. The company was liquidated in bankruptcy proceedings, with the assets sold off to pay restitution to victims. Most of the employees, people who had nothing to do with Lawrence's crimes, lost their jobs. Dominic Hale, the CFO, received a 5-year prison sentence despite his cooperation. Judith Monroe, the general counsel, received a 7-year sentence. Trevor Brand, the head of acquisitions, got 12. Senator Whitfield was indicted for bribery. He pleaded guilty and resigned from the Senate. Got 3 years. The victims, the employees of destroyed companies, the defrauded investors, the families of the children who died, received compensation from the liquidation of Lawrence's assets. It wasn't enough. It never is. But it was something. As for me, the SEC awarded me a whistleblower payment of $23 million, based on the fines and restitution collected in the case. $23 million for exposing Lawrence Ashford's crimes. I stared at the direct deposit notification for 10 minutes, unable to process what I was seeing. I'd spent 3 years participating in crimes, then spent a year destroying the man who'd committed those crimes. And in the end, I was rewarded with more money than my mother had earned in her entire lifetime of honest work. The irony was not lost on me. I used part of the money to pay off the legal debts of Gina, Randall, and Jasper. They'd sacrificed so much to testify. The least I could do was make sure they weren't bankrupted for doing the right thing. I donated $5 million to cancer research, specifically to fund clinical trials for drugs treating rare childhood cancers. I made the donation in memory of my mother and all the children who died because Lawrence had prioritized profit over lives. I used another $2 million to create a whistleblower support fund, providing legal assistance and financial support to people trying to expose corporate crimes. The rest I kept, invested conservatively, enough to live on comfortably for the rest of my life without ever working again. I moved to a small town in Vermont, bought a modest house with a view of the mountains, started teaching business ethics at a local community college. The students think it's funny that their ethics professor is a whistleblower who helped take down a billionaire. They ask me questions about whether it was worth it, whether I'd do it again, whether I'm a hero or a villain. I tell them the truth. I don't know. I saw Lydia Brennan one last time, about 6 months after the sentencing. She came to Vermont to interview me for a follow-up piece on the Apex Meridian case. We met at a coffee shop in town. She looked tired but satisfied. Her original article had won its 2nd Pulitzer. She'd written a book about the case that was on the bestseller list. "You did it," she said. "You actually took him down." "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have done it without your reporting. And I couldn't have done it without your evidence. We made a good team. We drank our coffee in silence for a moment. Then Lydia asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you have any regrets? I thought about it. Really thought about it. I regret that I didn't act sooner, I said finally. I spent 3 years watching Lawrence hurt people, and I did nothing. I was complicit. I participated. I benefited. The fact that I eventually exposed him doesn't erase those 3 years. You were afraid. That's human. So was Lawrence, probably. Fear of not being powerful enough. Fear of not being rich enough. Fear of losing what he had. We all make choices based on fear. That doesn't excuse them. Lydia nodded slowly. What about the people who are calling you a hero? The whistleblower advocacy groups, the victims who thanked you, the students you're teaching. I think hero is the wrong word. I'm just someone who finally did the right thing after doing the wrong thing for a very long time. That doesn't make me heroic. It makes me human. And the money? The whistleblower payment. I laughed bitterly. You want to know the truth? Sometimes I think I should give it all away. That I don't deserve it. That I'm profiting from the same crimes I helped commit. But then I remember what it was like to be powerless. To watch my mother die because she couldn't afford health care. And I keep the money because I never want to be powerless again. That's honest, at least. Honesty is all I have left. It's been 18 months since Lawrence Ashford was sentenced. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, thinking about the 3 years I spent at Apex Meridian. Wondering how many people I could have saved if I'd acted sooner. Wondering whether my eventual whistleblowing will really balance out the harm I caused through my complicity. I don't have an answer. I'm not sure there is one. But I know this. The world is full of Lawrence Ashfords. Powerful people who hurt others for profit and think they'll never face consequences. And the only thing that stops them is when people like me, flawed, complicit, self-interested people, finally decide that enough is enough. I'm not a hero. I'm not a saint. I'm just someone who was tired of being part of the problem and decided to become part of the solution, even though it cost me almost everything. And if that makes me a villain in my own story, so be it. I'd rather be the villain who told the truth than the hero who stayed silent. So that's my story. The whole story. No sugarcoating. No pretending I'm something I'm not. Here's what I want to know from you. Would you have signed that NDA? Would you have taken the money and stayed silent? Or would you have fought back, knowing it might cost you everything? And here's the harder question. If you'd spent 3 years participating in those crimes, would you have exposed them? Or would you have convinced yourself that you were powerless, that speaking up wouldn't make a difference, that you'd already crossed too many lines to turn back? Because I think most people believe they'd do the right thing. But most people are wrong. The right thing is expensive. It's painful. It costs you your career, your money, and your peace of mind. Sometimes it costs you everything. And the question isn't whether you're brave enough to do it. The question is whether you're angry enough, or desperate enough, or guilty enough. I was all three. And that's the only reason I acted. So tell me, what would it take for you to become the witness instead of the accomplice? Because someday, you might find yourself in that room with the NDA and the pen and the choice between your survival and someone else's justice. And when that day comes, you'll learn exactly who you are. Lawrence Ashford is currently serving his sentence at FCI Hazleton in West Virginia. He'll be eligible for release in 2045. He's 60 years old now. The actuarial tables say he probably won't make it that long. I'm 43. I live in a town where nobody knows who I am. I teach business ethics to kids who think corporate crime is something that happens to other people, in other places. I tell them it happens everywhere. And it continues because people like them, good people, smart people, ethical people, make small compromises until they can't tell the difference between right and wrong anymore. I tell them about my mother, about Lawrence, about the 3 years I spent as an accomplice and the 18 months I spent as a witness. And I tell them the most important lesson I've learned. Silence is complicity. Inaction is action. And sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to become the villain in someone else's story. The world doesn't need heroes. Heroes are too pure, too noble, too rare. What the world needs is witnesses. Imperfect, flawed, self-interested people who finally get angry enough to tell the truth, even when it costs them everything. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to call me a hero. I'm just asking you to remember my story the next time you're in a room where something terrible is happening, and you have a choice between speaking up and staying silent. Because that choice is how you find out who you really are. And trust me, you might not like what you discover. Subscribe for more confessions from people who cross lines they can't uncross. New story every week. Same uncomfortable truths. Same refusal to pretend anyone's hands are clean. Like this if you think I did the right thing. Leave it neutral if you think I'm still a villain. Dislike it if you think I didn't go far enough. And drop a comment telling me, what would you have done? At what point would you have acted? Or would you have signed the NDA and stayed silent? Be honest. Because the only thing more dangerous than a Lawrence Ashford is a room full of people who convince themselves they'd do something different. See you next time. Or not. Either way, I'll sleep fine. I always do now.